Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Gary, first of all. Thank you, Justin, for teeing me up for this. And thank you very much to everyone. I am going to talk about the market for ash. And throughout my presentation, you'll see all these scary-looking pictures of Kalara everywhere. That's not to intimidate you into cutting your trees down, I promise. As an outline, first of all, we're going to look at the domestic market and the importance of ash, which Christine kindly did very well at pointing out. Moving on to Kalara as I've experienced it, and then Kalara and its effect on ash. Then looking at its effect on our markets, which is one of the key reasons why I'm here, and moving on to British ash exports and the thinking behind the company and a bit of the story. And then I want to give you a quick bit of an insight into what we're looking for and some examples so that when you go away from here, you can look at an ash and you can quickly see whether or not it would constitute export quality. And then the last, Kalara or no Kalara, which isn't, in my opinion, the question, but some people it is, and we'll summarise with that. So the domestic market. Well, Christine was right. It is the third most common broadleaf in the UK, and it's the second most planted, which seems surprising considering there isn't really a market as such. It's been used in society for many years, grown in coppice rotations in areas of the country, as I'm sure you're all aware. It's characteristically a tough and natural shock absorber with a high level of strength and flexibility. I don't remember the wooden tennis racket, but I'm sure some of you do. And the horse-drawn carriage, maybe a few of you. But for skis, aircrafts, I suppose also for chair frames, and that's still in use. But the overall theme, I think, in that is that really most of these markets are now redundant, replaced by metals and composites in general. So I think it's fair to say that over the last 15 years, the domestic market for ash has all but disappeared. With this, we've seen a significant fall in prices, and it appears, as is often the case with timbers, it seems to have gone out of fashion. The main mass market at the moment, which to some is a travesty, is actually firewood. Biofuel has come in and offers an outlet for almost all our timber in the UK, but it is the lowest fresh felled moisture content of any timber, and as a result does command a high price, especially at the moment. It is fetching very good prices, as is most of their firewood in the UK. Timber usage, it has retained a small niche for furniture making, again the frames of chairs, and the best quality material finding a reasonable price, and we've seen some beautiful ash doors. I can't understand why it's not more popular. Maybe Peter could enlighten us after this. But there has, as I say, been little demand for it in any volume. I think personally that's shown to me through the sheer quantity of standing mature ash in the UK. I've come across countless trees that could have come down, I think, long ago. As Justin touched on, there is a Hurley market. There are 350 Hurley sticks required by Ireland each year, and if you can get on board with that, if you grow fast, clean, straight ash, then you can see a very, very good return. There's no doubt about it. So Kalara, and a bit of background to the spread of the disease. It was first found or first originated from Lithuania in the early 90s, and as you can see from the top maps, quickly spread through Europe. We believe through wind-borne spores, although there is still a little bit of contention over that, and various vectors, be that the soles of my feet or a car or a bird or anything. And the disease has now taken hold all over Germany, Holland, Belgium, and is in France, where a recent trip to the Pas-de-Calais showed it to be widespread. It took about 5 years to become truly widespread in Denmark, where 90% of the trees became affected and over 80% of their forest ash of any suitable size has now been felled. From our contacts in Denmark, we understand that the early years played out in a very similar fashion to what's currently going on in the UK, with a lot of foresters and landowners waiting and seeing and not believing as such that it was going to come and kill all their trees before a frenzy of cutting took over. And all our understanding of Kalara really does come from the Danish experience. So since its recorded arrival in 2012, it has been very well publicised here and reported comprehensively and mapped by the Forestry Commission. As you can see, they've been releasing outbreak maps every month on average. And I would say, though, that I've been recording these outbreak maps, and since July, they really haven't changed much. And I can't help feeling that although they are useful, that we may be past the point of getting someone to come out and view a tree and approve it and put a dot on the map. I think surely this is becoming uneconomic and unreasonable to expect of the Forestry Commission. I think we may just have to accept the fact that it is here. I've been to numerous sites that haven't been red dotted where there's clear evidence of Kalara, and that's all over the country. I think certainly a trip to Norfolk to visit some of the infected sites would shock many people from quieter areas of the country. It's definitely spreading this disease, and it's very prevalent in sapling stage ash. it's fair to say that to my naked eye, I see what I think is Clara everywhere. I've nearly driven myself off the road several occasions looking up at the edge of a dual carriageway. But I think it's fair to say that ash haven't looked well for a number of years now, and be that the recent climate or anything more sinister, I'm not sure. But I think, as with many media stories, dieback started very loudly and has quietened down a bit as people wait to see what's going to happen to our UK ash. Unlike Dutch elm disease, which killed a mature tree within months, Clara is a much more gradual process, and dieback is a literal term, with many mature trees likely to die from secondary infections once their resistance is weakened. Honey fungus is a particular disease that is likely to kill more ash that have Clara than Clara itself, maybe. So on to a little identification of Clara from our experience. So as we're seeing now all over this area, young trees and saplings are the first to die. The top right is a picture from Norfolk, and you can see very clearly that the crown dies down, and you will see lesions, diamond-shaped lesions coming from the branches into the stem. Once it moves into the mature tree, the process seems to slow significantly, and some of the first indications that the tree is under stress are the increased branching and kind of candelabra effect, like a bit of a kind of chandelier effect in the crown of the tree, which slowly starts to lose leaf and over a few years dies down through the tree. Once the disease comes down through the tree, it gets into the roots, and as I explained before, that is where the attack from a secondary disease as honey fungus can come up through the root system and ultimately finish off the tree. The Danes, in their experience, I've got a slight issue with my display as well, sorry about that. Notice that. The Danes, from their experience, estimated about 5 to 6 years once the tree had contracted Clara to it becoming useless as a log and really just as firewood. Here's some graphic images to scare you all of Clara in action. So the top left and top right are much more familiar with the UK. The top middle is quite a mature tree, and that is a good example of the discoloration that Clara can cause as it travels through the butt and renders it firewood only. And then the bottom three are what a lot of people would see just as a leaf loss, but is actually the first signs of Clara in mature trees. And obviously, being so high up, it's very difficult to tell what is and isn't, especially as we are, and I am certainly learning, every day from different woodlands and different people's experiences of what the disease looks like. So, the effects on our markets, well, what are they going to be? There's 15 million metres cubed of ash in the UK of what I would classify as mature ash, so 60 years plus. So if we can assume that 20% of this is usable for timber, that would give us about 3 million metres cubed in total. And our current domestic usage being 5,000 metres cubed a year would mean that that would take us about 600 years to process. And considering that Clara is likely to come through the UK within the next 15 years, we are going to struggle somewhat, I'd say. And the majority of that, if it doesn't make the market in time, will have to be firewood. And to move on to firewood, assuming that we have a 10% survival rate, as has been the experience in countries all over Europe, 23.5 million metres cubed will die of Clara, and this all has to be processed by us within a reasonable amount of time. Obviously, once it's dead, it can be used as firewood, but there is a limit to that. And that would constitute 39 years at our current consumption rate, assuming that we stopped burning all other broadleaf species. So I think that it's fair to say, as with many situations, uncertainty leads people to adopt a wait-and-see approach, and for Clara, I don't think it's going to be any different. But I would ask the question, if this disease does play out in the same way it has on the continent, then do we have the infrastructure in this sector to deal with the sheer volume of timber that could come on the market? The skilled contractors to do the work, for a start. We all know that you can bring a harvester in and bash through an area of softwood very quickly, but to find a skilled contractor to fell mature ash, and to fell a lot of mature ash, which is a notoriously difficult tree to fell. It can split very easily. It's nicknamed the Widowmaker for obvious reasons. So I think that we're going to struggle. And if everyone waits and suddenly at the same time decides they want their ash cut, we're just simply not going to be able to do it. Or someone's going to set up an amazing contracting business that's going to make lots of money. But I think that the way it's going in the UK is that we're seeing a culmination of disease and a very, very busy sector anyway. And I think that if we sit still, then we are running the risk of just increasing the workload in a few years down the line. A couple of people, when I've had a chat with them in their woods, say, well, if Cholera does come and it does move in and kill all our ash, then what's the point in me cutting them if I'm not going to get any money for them? I'm going to make a loss, which is fair enough, I suppose, although I would say that, and I'm sure you would agree, that good woodland management, it does what is necessary regardless of the market. And to retain dead timber on productive land is clearly a massive waste. So I say that there's so much mature ash in the UK that's standing at the moment anyway. Let's get it down while the prices are good. So a bit of a background about British ash exports. It really started from Brun being a Danish name. We have a lot of contacts and friends out in Denmark, and some of them with Woodland, and in Denmark, Woodland is meticulously managed. And I was sent out there by my dad a few years ago to try and learn a bit about how to mark trees. And that coincided with a period of intense felling in Denmark, where they really did begin to knock down dying ash and preemptively felling healthy ash in order to capitalize on this export market they'd set up with Asia. And they were obviously worried because, as with any export market, it's out of their control. If it closes, and they've missed the boat. So they were frantically felling. And when we saw that, we thought, well, what are we going to do? We have ash in our woodland. It's not by any means amazing, but I think, as most of you would agree, seeing a managed tree going as firewood is a shame. So we wanted to find a market for our own ash. And in 2012, when Cholera arrived, we made contact with Denmark, made links with Asia, and set up a trial shipment from East Anglia to see how they would find UK ash. We practiced loading it into containers, which is how it's shipped, which I promise you looks a lot easier on the continent with 40-foot straight trees than it is trying to load 3-meter and 7-meter and 8-meter lengths into a container. It takes a long time, but we're getting better. And it seemed to work. So we thought, well, perhaps we could roll this out over the country, presuming, of course, that we could keep transport costs, which are the crippling factor, down. So instead of trying to bring everything down to Felixstowe and export, we looked at setting up depots around the country where we can take timber. It can be loaded into a container and exported from Felixstowe, Immingham, Avonmouth, Southampton, these areas of the country where, as Christine pointed out, there's ash all over the country. And if we could find local depots that we could get the timber to load and then take it out on a boat to Asia, then it might work. And it is about keeping costs down, I must say. So the situation in the UK at present, as I explained before, is, from what I understand, startlingly similar to the Danish situation 8 years ago. The disease had been present there for a few years. It wasn't killing as expected, and landowners and foresters, they couldn't see so much. They couldn't see the disease affecting their mature trees, and there was talk of resistance and exaggeration of its effects by the media. This apparently continued for a few years until very quickly Cholera suddenly took hold across the country and began to really impact on the national woodland, leading to a pretty frantic level of felling and then preemptive felling to ensure they capitalised on these newly acquired markets. Well, the market is still open, and prices do seem constant for this season at least, offering a good price for what many people would consider to be the unprocessable part of the tree anyway. I mean, you're talking about, in some instances, a very large butt, which a firewood merchant doesn't necessarily want to deal with, and a part of the tree which many would hate to see go as firewood anyway. So I want to go on and talk a little bit about what the market wants, specifications, and what to look for when you're out in the woods. So the market wants the butt of the tree, and the butt of the tree only, the first length really. Minimum is 3.3 meters. There is a 0.3 allowance on every log, which is an insistence from the market at the other end. Going up to 11.7, which is the length of a high cube 40-foot container. Clean and straight, if you've seen our specification sheet, that may imply that we're looking for the perfect log, which isn't the case, but I'm terrified of someone felling all their ash and saying they're ready and me turning up and not being able to accept them. So the larger the diameter, I'd say the greater the bend, and also the greater the defect and the greater the number of occluded knots, because you're obviously dealing with more timber. And I've had to try and think about trees from a timber buyer's perspective, and not from a management perspective, which is a little hard to do, but I think I'm getting the hang of. I like to think of a bend as curve being thinking about whether the saw is going to leave the log on the way through, and that's quite a good way to think. Logs can be discoloured, as is often the case with ash, and a lot of the ash that we have in England, as I explained, is over mature and is much more likely to be discoloured. But it can't be black. They won't accept black staining inside the timber. And once the disease moves through the tree, in our experience, in the experience of Denmark, that takes about 3 to 5 years before the process renders the tree unusable for this market. It must be clean, no ivy, honeysuckle, or mud, purely for phytosanitary reasons at the other end. I would say that someone was suggesting they were going to fell their ash into nets to stop them getting muddy, and that doesn't have to happen. But just relatively clean is fine. It doesn't matter if it's got a bit of mud on. I would point out that the remaining element of the tree, which in our experience can constitute 40% of its value, comes from the firewood that's left behind. So once you fell your ash and we take a crosscut and the length that we can accept, you're then left with an enormous quantity of firewood. And so you are producing a double income for a single tree, which I suppose helps to spread risk further by selling into 2 markets. What's it being used for? Well, this is important because I didn't actually know exactly what it was being used for until a few weeks ago. And it's going to service China's building boom. So flooring, but really door and window architraves, skirting for housing, and only about 10% shipped back to the to Europe. That means that we are vulnerable to the changes in the Chinese market if they decide they either have gone off ash, or if their building boom stops, or if they have an economic crisis or something. Then it's likely that the market will disappear. So I can't guarantee it'll be here for a number of years. Again, suggesting that if we wait 5 years to see what this disease is going to do, we may have missed the boat with this market. A couple more details on the specification. So those of you who have had me come and visit your woodland, you'll know that the felling season coincides, unfortunately, but is the case with seemingly all timber activities, with the shooting season. I would say now that the 15th of February isn't now set in stone. It really is dependent on when the sap starts to rise. That can have a really big effect on the colouring of the timber. And in the UK, we quite often have a very early spring or a very short winter, I suppose you could say. And I think we have to gauge what the weather's doing when it comes to that part of that time of the year. But if you're planning on doing everything but at the end of the shooting season and you run over by a week, that's not a problem. You can also get round any wet weather or potentially any shooting issues by leaving the timber felled at stump until March, April time if you want, and then taking it out. So there are ways to work around it. I always try and pull the line that you're doing a massive benefit to the shoot by letting in light and increasing ground flora, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Prices do vary with mid-diameter, and the mid-diameter only. It's not based on quality, it's based on mid-diameter, provided we can get a 3.3 metre length from it. The maximum diameter bracket being 40 centimetres plus, which commands £90 a cubic metre, so very favourable in comparative to recent market prices. And now I want to just talk quickly about bends and knots, which I'm sure you can appreciate, much easier if I had a nice ash in front of us all. I could point out what's what, but I'll try with these pictures. So the bends, when I look at a tree that's bent, I have to try and think about what they could get a length from. So there's a very, very bent tree there, but you can clearly see that there's quite a significant first length on it before it bends and goes straight up in another vertical plane. Now that would be fine, and usually what you would say is, well, we'll cross-cut it at the bend and get 2 lengths from it. The issue with ash is that it has a very big tendency to split, especially when you get a straight grain running through a log. So instead of doing that, we'll try and maximize the length of a first length by keeping any second length on and marking out. So let's say at that bend, I might make a 40.4 of a metre allowance and spray that so it's clearly obvious and take that off the price of the tree. But it just means that once it gets to the other end, they can make that cross-cut. And if you can appreciate that these logs are crossing the equator in a metal box, the tendency to split is probably going to be realised if we don't keep the tree as together as we can. So when it comes to felling, we could take it right at the base of the tree and trim off the buttresses so that you can't sneak in a second length. People are trying to do. And when it comes to a cross-cut, we like to cross-cut it into, if there's a fork where you're finishing, we like to cross-cut just into the fluting of the fork. That helps, any movement in the grain helps hold it together. Or if there's a knot, through the middle of the knot. Occluded knots, again, defects and knots are dependent on the on the diameter of the tree, but there's an example there below. That tree probably has a few too many on for us. We're looking for 1 or 2 a meter, and let's say in the middle of that tree there was an enormous, great big defect where a branch had come off, and it was clean below and clean above. I would simply spray out that mark and carry on. So you would miss out on 0.4, but you would still, the tree wouldn't be a no. A lot of the over-mature ash we've come across have quite a large amount of rot in the bottom, and we'd also like that to be left on because that helps hold the tree together, unless it's very, very, very bad, in which case I'll probably make a judgment on that when I come, and we could sound off a bit. But in general, if we could leave rot on if it has it, unless you can get your head into the tree, which usually means that the rot's too big. I think that's explained all that. Oh no, I'll talk a bit about how I would approach you. So the process is, at the moment, is I'm having a lovely time touring the UK, staying in hotels and visiting lovely big estates and looking at their trees, but that isn't obviously economic at all. And with costs the way they are, we're finding it very difficult to get out and do a site assessment. So it really has to be up to the forester or woodland owner to make a judgment on this. And I would say that the vast majority of ash that are over 30 to 40 centimetres mid-diameter, as long as they've got a 3.3 metre length on them from the butt upwards, they are acceptable. And you should use that as a guideline, really. You should also keep in mind 27 metres cubed, which is the minimum we can accept from an estate, which is basically an Arctic load. And anything that if you go over 27 metres cubed, I'm not expecting you to do it in 27 metre cubed blocks, then we could hopefully make up a load from a neighbouring estate, hopefully. So the grading process, once they're felled, I will come and measure this and measure the final length. If you have to do a cross cut because let's say there's a knot that I can't go above that you've left on, then I'll make a cross cut and measure that and give you a final price based on a per tree value and a total value. And then once it's taken to hard ride side by you, or it's left at the side of a road, we'll take it away, and payment comes within 8 weeks of haulage. Well, Kalara or no Kalara? And as I said, I don't think that's the question, but to a lot of people it is. Many of the estates I've been to have informed me that we don't have any ash, we've got very little ash. But if I go on a walk with them through a lovely stand of their favourite stand of oak, you could quite often find quite a large volume hidden away, and it's funny how when there is no market, trees seem to become invisible. And numerous sites I've been on have had mature ash that's really ready to come down, and which the longer it stands, the higher the risk of rot and discoloration. They pass their peak and slowly begin to decline in value, and I find myself quite often drawing a graph and then getting to this stage, and a lot of the ash I'm kind of looking at are definitely on the downslope. To some traditional old landowners, I have to explain it in the form of a crop of wheat that's left unharvested. You really do need to get these trees down when they're at their peak, otherwise you're not going to make as much as you would. I asked what's being done with the area of woodland. You can make space for new species regenerating or some replanting. Every area has growing potential. And I'm not advocating, unlike my father, who probably would be if he was here, going out and felling all your ash in one go. And those who are holding out for resistance would probably feel very uncomfortable if I said that. But there are so many times I've stood under a fantastic ash tree that it will never be as valuable, I don't think, as it is now, and is ready to come down, and I'm told it might be that one that's resistant. I'm afraid that you need to realise the value of that tree, and there will be relations or saplings in the ground around it that will, if it is resistant, have that resistance in them. And I don't think you should avoid profiting from your woodland in order to hope that every tree is going to be resistant. Because if we leave 100% of our ash standing in the hope that when we see which ones die and see which ones are resistant, we will miss out on this opportunity, I think. So I can't stand here and persuade you that Kalara is going to come and wipe out all the ash in the UK, whatever the experience of the continent is. However, Kalara aside, this is a real opportunity to market ash at a rate that's better than we've seen for years. And it removes that part of the tree that the firewood merchant doesn't like. It's often too big to process, remembering, of course, that you will get a significant income from the firewood element anyway. So in conclusion, I would encourage you to make a start. I can't see the market prices being any better than they are now. the export market, like any other, can't be guaranteed in the long run. And are we going to be able to cope with the potential level of felling activity and processing if everyone begins at once and in earnest? It does take a bit of foresight to go out and fell timber that is yet to contract this disease. But we're lucky enough to see how cholera has affected other countries, and to presume that we're going to be somehow different to them is, I think, an enormous risk for our forestry sector to take. Thank you very much.